For many people, when they think of France, it is long holidays on a Mediterranean beach, 2-hour lunch breaks washed down with a bottle of red wine, 35-hour working weeks and a generous early retirement. We're going to look at the private sector pension system to see how close this image is to the truth. We're going to take a look at the French pension system in terms of contribution years, retirement ages, penalties for early retirement known as the décote, the recent reforms and suspension in the autumn of 2025, how European coordination works and taxation. That's quite a lot to cover. The French system is a pay-as-you-go system called repartition. That means that workers pay the pensions of retirees. The alternative is capitalization, where your contributions are invested in stocks and shares. If you have full contributions, the French state pension will be 50% of your average salary over your best 25 years. If you have less than 25 years contributions, it is the average over the years you paid in. The pension has two components. A basic pension known as the régime de base or CNAV. A complementary pension called the régime complémentaire or Agirc Arrco. This system applies specifically to private sector employees. To qualify for a full pension, you'll need to pay in for 172 quarters, known in French as trimestres. That's 43 years for people born in 1965 or later. An increase in contribution years from 42 to 43 is being phased in from 2023 to 2027. A quarter is validated for €1,690 of gross earnings in 2025. That means you can validate all your year's quarters in just 2 months if your earnings are high enough. There is a monthly contributions limit, so you can't validate all the quarters with just 1 month's earnings. The minimum retirement age is currently being raised from 62 to 64 years by 2030. However, if you don't have enough contributions, you will only get a full pension, called taux plein, at 67. That is, there is no décote or penalty for early retirement. Be aware that at 67 your pension is still paid pro rata based on the number of quarters you've paid in. So if you have paid in for 25 years, your pension will be 25/43 of a full pension. It is just there is no extra penalty. So what is the décote? Basically, if you retire before 67, you are penalized 0.625% of your full pension for each missing quarter up to a maximum of 20 quarters. The number of missing quarters is calculated as 67 minus your retirement age. If you retire at 65, you will be missing 8 quarters. For 20 missing quarters, your pension is 50 minus 12.5%. That is 37.5%. Say your pension at 67 is €1,000. You will have a penalty of €250 for 20 missing quarters. Your pension will therefore be €750 per month. If you have 100 of the required 172 quarters, you will receive €750 multiplied by 100 and divided by 172, which is €436. If you work additional quarters beyond the maximum, there is a surcote. This is a bonus of 1.25% for each quarter worked. To give an example, if your basic pension is €12,000 and you have all of your contributions, if you work another year you will increase your pension by 4 times 1.25%, that is 5%. So your pension will now be €12,600 or €50 extra per month. This system applies to the CNAV component of the state pension. Take the case of Marie. To receive the maximum rate of pension, she must validate 172 quarters or wait until she turns 67. Marie wants to retire at 63 with just 140 quarters. She is 32 quarters short to obtain the maximum rate of 50%. The maximum décote is 20 quarters times 0.625% or 12.5%. However, as she is retiring at 63, she is 16 quarters short of 67, so the smaller figure is used. Her pension will be calculated at the rate of 50 minus 16 times 0.625%, which is 40%. If her pension at taux plein would have been €1,000 per month, she will receive €800 instead. However, between 63 and 67, she will receive €38,400 in pension payments. If she had waited to 67 to take her pension, it would take her 16 years to make that back. She will be 83 before she is in credit for having retired later. If she worked to 67, she would also have 16 more quarters, so her pro-rata pension payment would also be around 11% higher. The Agirc Arrco is a complementary pension for all private sector employees. A 10% temporary penalty is applied if retiring before 67 for someone with full pension contributions. A penalty, called a minoration, is applied if retiring before 67 without sufficient quarters. The penalty starts at 1% per quarter. So in the case of Marie, she would be missing 16 quarters, so has a 16% penalty. This is a permanent reduction. If her complementary pension was €400 at 67, she would receive €336 per month at 63. Up to a 50% penalty can be applied to someone retiring at 57. It can be seen that it is very important to have all your quarters. Accumulating 172 quarters or 43 years of work is quite a tall order, especially in France where people enter the workplace later, typically 23 years after higher education. For many French workers, retiring before 67 implies a big penalty on their pension rights. For people who entered the workforce at 16, they can typically have validated all their quarters by 59. Disability can also grant early retirement. You can also accumulate quarters during unemployment, as a carer or for maternity. Typically 4 quarters for maternity leave and 4 quarters for education per child. Up to a maximum of 3 children, so 24 quarters. In the French system, you can acquire trimestres cotisés, worked quarters, and trimestres assimilés, non-worked quarters. Non-worked quarters don't count towards the salary calculation or for the complementary pension. The 2023 pension reform raised the legal minimum retirement age from 62 to 64 years progressively by 2030. Early retirees would also need 172 quarters of contributions, that is a career of 43 years, with this change occurring sooner at 2027. In return, the government promised a minimum pension of €1,200 per month for a full career at least minimum wage, but we'll come back to this later. The reform expanded the possibility of early retirement for people who started work earlier. It also saw the phasing out of special pension arrangements for former state firms like EDF, which had allowed their staff to retire early. Some firms, such as telecoms provider Orange, still run their own early retirement schemes which enable someone with at least 15 years with the firm to retire as young as 59. In the autumn of 2025, the government announced the suspension of the pension reform until after the next presidential election. Normally in 2027. The reform would then restart. However, the full text of the suspension has not been published, so the exact details are unknown. In theory, the system will be frozen as it currently stands, with a minimum retirement age of 69 years 9 months for people born in 1964 and 170 quarters of contributions to qualify for a full pension. The suspension will be debated in Parliament in the autumn of 2025. At the same time, there will be no pension increase in 2026. Typically, French pensions are indexed to the inflation rate. They will then be indexed 0.4% below the inflation rate until 2030, which will see pensioners losing significant buying power. Over 30 countries have signed pension treaties with France. These include the UK, USA, Canada, India, Japan, Brazil, Andorra, Argentina, Israel and Turkey, to name the most important. Basically countries where you find considerable expat French communities. To calculate the total number of quarters contributed, retirees can include periods of work in any of these countries. Take the case of Jim. He has contributed 140 quarters to the French pension system but started his career in the USA where he worked 5 years or 20 quarters, and he also worked 2 years in Japan or 8 quarters. He has a total of 168 quarters, which will reduce his décote or penalty when he retires in France. To validate his rights, he needs to contact the French pension service, Assurance Retraite, at least 6 months before his retirement date. He tells them where he worked and gives details such as social security numbers. The French service will then contact the country's social security systems to ask for an attestation of periods worked. Jim decided to work another year in the USA before finally retiring to France with his French pension. He can contact the French pension service to include these extra 4 quarters in his pension calculation, which, in Jim's case, will cancel his penalty. His pension will still be paid pro rata by the French system. That is 140 divided by 172 quarters. It is up to Jim to get his other pensions paid in each country. Many countries will only pay pensions after a certain number of years of contributions. For the UK, you must have 10 years before any pension is paid. However, under the agreement with the French, even a single year of contributions must be paid pro rata. You can't double count pension years. For example, Jim moved to France in the middle of the year and has a full year of rights in both France and Japan. However, he can only count in one system. Foreign contributions can reduce the décote but will have no effect on the pro rata rate paid by the French, which is based on just French contributions. Contact the pension services of the various countries where you have worked to check what contributions you have made and when. It is a good idea to create a spreadsheet with this information. You can then visualize how many years you have and where you have gaps. It may be possible to make voluntary contributions to fill in any gaps. In France, voluntary contributions are expensive, so speak to a financial advisor to see if this is the best course of action. Under the Régime Général, CNAV, you can purchase up to 12 quarters in total for two main cases: years of higher education, institut supérieur, or years with an incomplete number of quarters, i.e., fewer than 4 quarters in a year. The purchase must be made before you receive your pension. The cost depends on your age at the time of the purchase, your recent income earnings, and the option you choose. The two main options are option taux sol, rate alone. This helps reduce or cancel the décote that is applied if you don't have enough quarters. Option taux, a durée d'assurance. This improves both the rate and the duration of insurance taken into account. That is, it reduces the décote and improves the pro rata rate of pension. The payment you make is deductible from your taxable income. France also allows voluntary pension contributions, versement volontaire, to maintain your rights while you're not working in France, for example if you go abroad, stop working, or aren't covered by any compulsory French scheme. L'assurance volontaire vs. AVV. You must have previously been insured in France for at least 6 months, as an employee, self-employed, etc. You must apply to join within 6 months of losing compulsory coverage, though exceptions exist if you're abroad. It's open to French citizens and foreigners who are covered under the French system. Managed by L'Assurance Retraite. You choose a contribution base, assiette, between a minimum, around the SMIC, and a maximum, the Social Security ceiling, plafond de la Sécurité sociale. The contribution rate is roughly 17.75% of the chosen base. It changes slightly each year. Each year you can validate up to 4 quarters, depending on the contributions paid, exactly as if you were working. Minimum annual contribution almost equal to 17.75% times €21 minimum wage or SMIC, is approximately €3.760 per year. This is more than you would pay if you were simply employed, but when you're an employee, you and your employer each pay part of the pension contribution. Roughly 17% employee plus 28% employer is approximately 45% total. But you personally only pay the employee share, and you also earn a salary in return. You validate quarters and acquire pension rights while being paid. Voluntary contributions are cheaper than buying back pension quarters and are interesting if you live abroad in a non-agreement country and have no local pension system. You're within 2 to 3 years of retirement and missing a few quarters for taux plan. You have no realistic way to earn in France, for example expatriation, family care. As a comparison, for an employee to validate 1 quarter you must earn 150 times le SMIC horaire brut in that year. For 2025, that's roughly 150 times €11.65, which is about €1,748 brut per quarter. To validate 4 quarters, that is €6,992. There's no requirement to spread the income across months. What matters is the total annual gross pay. French pensions are also subject to some social charges which are about 9.1% in total, but this is reduced to 0 for small pensions, less than €12,250. Social Security is levied before tax is taken into account. Foreign pensions don't have a Social Security charge. French pensions are taxed at the usual rates. The first €11,497 are at 0 rate. Up to €29,315 at the 11% rate, and so on. Your non-French pension is added to the French pension and taxed at the same rates. There is a 10% professional allowance capped at €4,000 per household. The 2026 budget has proposed capping this at €2,000. So a pension of €29,000 will have a €2,900 tax-free allowance, but this will be only €2,000 if the 2026 budget is passed. As a very rough rule, for someone receiving around €25,000 in pensions, they will keep about 87% after tax and social security charges. You will need to apply to get any foreign pensions paid gross, but this may depend on tax treaties. Note that everything we've talked about in this presentation is for general information, but you should get professional advice for your own situation. We talked earlier about the pension reform promising a €1,200 per month basic pension, but in reality the minimum pension is just €777.20. This is the floor for private sector employees, provided they retire at toe plan or full contributions. That is 67 years old for people without sufficient contributions. Provided they have at least 120 quarters, this will be uplifted to €876.14. Beware that only worked or contributed quarters count for the uplift. This excludes unemployment, sickness, maternity, foreign pensions or military service. These only count for the day coat. The €1,200 per month figure, that is 85% of the minimum wage or SMIC, is an aspiration and was in fact already the case prior to the pension reform, so it was being sold twice. It is what you will receive if you retire either at 67 or with full worked pension contributions. You will need to have worked only in the private sector, not as a civil servant or self-employed, and you will need to have earned the minimum wage for all 43 years. Unions estimate this covers only around 1.8 million people in the workforce today. Again, foreign pensions won't contribute towards this minimum pension. There is a basic safety net for any French resident called the ASPA. It is currently set at €1,034 per month but is means tested. The means testing excludes the main residence but covers all other assets. These have a theoretical income of 3% per year applied. Savings of €10,000 would be assumed to generate €300 per year or €25 per month, and this would be deducted from the pension. You must be over 65 to receive this and live in France more than 6 months of the year. However, you don't need to be French, just a legal resident. The payments can be recovered from your estate if you leave over €100,000. Someone on a MICO pension could apply for ASPA to make their pension up to €1,034 total. Only the ASPA part would be clawed back from their estate. Hopefully this has given you a good overview of the French pension system as it applies to private sector workers. It is quite a complex system to navigate, especially for non-French people. The system is not particularly generous. It aims to keep people working as long as possible. With the pension reforms, the earliest people will be able to access their pension is 64 years old, and that is with penalties. For many, retirement will be at 67 years, as in other European countries. Foreign contributions can help avoid penalties, so it is important to find out how much you have contributed.